So let's talk about some of the unifying themes in biology. As I've said, as a way of looking at where we're going in this course and by way of review of the first half of the first lecture. So the first, of course, we've already talked about is the cell theory. All organisms are made of cells, and based on evolutionary evidence, the evidence for the theory of evolution, excuse me, all living cells come from pre-existing cells, except, of course, the first living cells, which had to evolve from replicating molecules. Now, another unifying theme is the molecular basis of inheritance, of genetics. DNA is the information storage molecule that maintains the archive of information required to build organisms. And it is DNA that is passed on from one generation to the next. That's the only thing really that is passed on from one generation to the next. And because of that, DNA is the primary level at which natural selection will operate. It is the ultimate level at which natural selection will operate. And this passage of DNA, of genetic information from generation to generation, is the stuff of classical genetics. But there's also unifying themes of biology that have to do with molecular genetics. And that has to do with the way cells process information stored in DNA to carry on their everyday functions. And this is the so-called central dogma of molecular biology, in which DNA is the information storage molecule, and that DNA is read into an RNA replica, simile, and that RNA then is translated into a protein. And it is proteins that do most of the work of the cell, and it is DNA which encodes those proteins through that RNA intermediate. And of course, DNA replicates before it is passed on from one cell to the next. So this information flow, which we will study intensively in a few weeks in this class, is the central dogma of molecular biology. And it describes the flow of information within cells, whereas classical genetics describes the flow of information between generations. And we'll be talking about that as well. So cells are quite efficient information processing devices, and they process information not only from their own genomes in DNA, but they receive and process information from the environment. We will spend considerable time in this course looking at mechanisms by which cells signal to each other, receive signals, and transduce those signals into responses. So these unifying themes that we're going over right now actually presage what a lot of the content of this course is about. Another unifying theme is that there are emergent properties as we go up the hierarchy of the organization of life, from molecules to cells to multicellular organisms to organ systems. There are emergent properties such that you see levels of complexity just simply not present at the previous level. And once multicellular organisms evolved, they could, for example, develop organ systems, including nervous systems, and allow for the evolution of intelligence. So emergent properties are that concept is a unifying theme in biology. Of course, evolutionary change that we've been talking about. Evolutionary evidence, molecular evidence especially, tells us that all life on Earth is kin. We are genuine kin, not just figurative kin. We're literal kin. We all came from a common ancestor. And this is based primarily on the universal genetic code, which all living organisms operate under, virtually all. The diversity of life is the result then of this evolutionary change. And so understanding biology, if you are to understand biology, you really must understand the mechanisms of evolutionary change. And you will be studying that as you go on in your biology careers here. And one thing that we've touched on as a unifying theme in these lectures so far is that there are examples of extreme evolutionary conservation. When we look at homologous genes, for example, over hundreds of millions of years of evolution, the sequences of DNA, the genetic code for certain genes has been maintained in almost pristine, unchanged form. So evolutionary conservation is a theme that we will see over and over again. And then finally, the concepts that relate to structure and function of molecules are unifying themes, I should say, in biology. Mainly that the function of a molecule is dependent upon its structure, and the structure of a molecule can often tell us about its function. So for example, this protein here, this donut-shaped protein, is a protein that binds to DNA here. This is DNA. And the protein binds to DNA and serves as a clamp, which holds down the molecular machinery responsible for replicating the DNA molecule. So clearly here, structure in the shape of a donut can define function. And we will spend a lot of time trying to come to grips with that concept. So that wraps up our first chapter and our first discussion having to do with this course. And we'll move now on to the nature of matter and molecules.